provide her such a possibility. My name is Lyubova Kulenko, and I am Executive Director of the Ukrainian Center for European Policy. I am pleased today to see all of you, and I hope and really believe that very soon we will have a possibility to organize offline events and to see each other in real life. Today, we would like to discuss with you the experience of Western Balkans and particularly the lessons that will be helpful for Ukraine. For such a possibility, I am grateful a lot to Konrad Adenauer Stiftung that is supporting us in this challenging time. I would like to stress that our team for more than 9 years is making its own input into European future of Ukraine. As researchers currently, we realized that it will be useful for Ukraine to study the last experience of EU negotiations with the candidate countries that have an intention to become the EU members. We are sure that Western Balkans are those countries that have such experience. And for this reason, we decided to make a first research on this region and to present you the main findings. To be honest, our team was mostly interested in challenges and problems that faced Western Balkans on their path to the EU. In our research, we focused on two big blocks. The first block is political circumstances, and the second block is new EU enlargement methodology. And today we are ready to deliver you our main findings. I would like to invite the members of the analytical team of Ukrainian Center of European Policy, Dmytro Naumenko and Snezhana Dyachenko. They are not the only who are working on the research, but we provide them an honor to present the results. So Dima and Snezhana, the floor is yours. In case Olga will join us, so we will provide her possibility for a small speech. Thank you.
Yeah, well, good morning, Luba, colleagues, dear participants. Let me take the floor then and go to our main presentation. I will share my screen now. Okay. We got the recommendations first. Now let's start from the very beginning. Okay, I hope everyone can see it perfectly. And to supplement Luba's words about the purpose of this paper, indeed, we will concentrate on lessons for Western Balkans, but this topic was quite wide for evaluation and research, and of course, we concentrated on the most interesting things for us. And if we short briefly about the structure of the paper, so we outlined first the political background for Western Balkans accession and the key lessons on how their political environment in the European Union, in single member states, and as well as in separate Western Balkan countries, they influenced the accession pathway. And what's more important, we provided a view how the recent Ukraine's candidacy to the European Union also changed the situation in the Western Balkans. The next focus was on purely methodological issues with a substantial block of our paper.
Dima, sorry that I'm interrupting you, but I received a feedback that your voice is not very well, so the people cannot hear your speech.
Okay, let
Can you make something to improve your voice? Morning.
How can you hear me now?
I think it's perfect now.
Okay, because I have two micros on my table.
Thank you. Sorry for interruption.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, let me proceed further. So the next substantial block of the paper was devoted to purely methodological aspects of the Western Balkans accession, because Ukraine would definitely face the same pathway too. And we didn't speculate, of course, that how this enlargement methodology may be upgraded or even changed. It's out of the scope of this paper. So we just showed that how it worked prior the Ukrainian candidacy and what to prepare next for Kiev. I mean, to be on the accession track. And finally, we came up with a series of conclusions. It's really plenty of them, touching a very different aspect of Western Balkans accession experience. But in this presentation, I will show only the key ones. So the rest one you can read thoroughly. I mean, in our paper. Okay, let me start then. I will present. I will present the political chapter of the paper. Then I will give the floor to my colleague Snezhana, and afterwards I will conclude on our main findings. If to say about the European Union enlargement, it already passed several key milestones. I will not repeat it in details, but let me stress that the European Union is an expansionist bloc in a good meaning. Of this definition, yes, and one might remember the core geopolitical mission of the European Union to create peaceful, sustainable, and prosper European continent. The entrance requirement to the European Union is also well known. There are very broad conditions in the Treaty of the European Union, 2 articles, and supplementing Copenhagen criteria that are dealing mainly with economic things to be fulfilled by the candidates. But as the latest wave of EU enlargement demonstrates, this process also depends on the bloc's absorption capacity, because the Union is expanding wave by wave, and of course it should maintain its ability to be cohesive after new members arrive into the Union. Balkans countries' experience is a separate or unique experience for the European Union, and what's important to say is that their accession motivated EU to significantly sophisticate the enlargement process with a strong emphasis on the rule of law chapters, and developing the comprehensive system of benchmarks and scrutiny, etc. So my colleague Snezhana will tell you more details about that. And the last one for the slide, that enlargement of the European Union is always quite complicated balance between geopolitical targets of the Union and political interests of single member states. So it's really a complicated thing. It's changing depending on the geopolitical environment and, of course, the influence of the separate member states. I will just skip, I guess, the next slides. So you probably perfectly know that the list of current EU candidate countries and potential candidates, every country has its unique accession profile and underline reasons of being candidate or not being the candidate. And we should only know that accession negotiations with the European Union was opened currently for Albania, North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Serbia. And actually, these are 4 countries are included in our paper as a selection to demonstrate the EU accession pathway. Yes.
Constantly interrupting you, but you did not start the presentation. You did not start to show the real presentation. We can see only the first title. Would you be so kind to press?
Okay, sorry for that. I can only repeat the presentation, I guess.
No. You started the presentation, but you were not moving. You know, like first slide, second slide. Oh, now yes, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So actually, I guess you didn't miss something crucial. Yeah. I was talking about this slide. So at this one, you can see the list of candidate countries and the selection of the candidates for the purpose of our paper. What are the first key lessons from the Western Balkans experience? That there are some barriers currently to be resolved, and that blocks the progress towards of being the European Union members. So first one, there are bilateral issues or conflict issues between a candidate country and the EU neighboring member states, and it has proven that it can have quite a devastating power on the candidate progress. So needless to say, there are lots of examples of it. So the latest one and the worst one was for North Macedonia with its conflict with Greece, or the name of the country. The next conflict was with Bulgaria regarding the historical grassroots of North Macedonia, so etc. So even the most fantastic reasons regarding borders, historical heritage, etc. can really block the progress. The next factor, which is need to be taken into account, the so-called policy of stabilitocracy by the European Union, and it means that the European Union applied this strategic approach as a countermeasure for competition with China and Russia in the Western Balkans region. And it means that it was a trade-off for the Western Balkans to keep the so-called visible stability. So instead of not pushing them much for the necessary reforms by the European Union. And it's a bad policy, really bad policy, because it frozen the deadlock in the really crucial reforms of the Balkans candidates, and finally led to the frustration in the European Union in the Balkans region, and stalled many reforms that are really needed for these countries to be the European Union members. Geopolitical dimension of the EU enlargement policy also plays a very important role, and as the recent experience with Ukraine demonstrates, that it plays in periods of turbulence. So it looks like some kind of waves. Yes. So in the very beginning of the Balkans accession, the European Union mood was also quite geopolitical and pro-expansionists. So now the war in Ukraine also became a trigger for the next wave of such, geopolitical push. And it's obviously a good moment for Ukraine, to break through, to catch this wave of geopolitics. The last one problem is the European Union internal reform. I already mentioned the European Union absorption capacity, and it seems that soon the bloc could expand to 36 total members, and to keep the bloc cohesive and manageable, it needs to undergo its internal reform. So mainly the unanimity requirement for voting inside the union. It will be the shift again in the balance of power between the different inside the European Union institutions, and between the Brussels and the national levels of governance. And also now the new framework for strategic cooperation have been introduced, like the European political community. It's also a question how it will influence the accession pathway for new candidates. And to say briefly about the role of single EU member states, there are three main blocks of them, grouped by the attitude and support of enlargement. And you may see here that there are obvious activists or supporters of enlargement, and there are mainly former Soviet bloc countries and countries from Central Eastern Europe, plus Austria, Italy, and Hungary, yes, which is quite a surprise, taking into account that it's almost an open ally of Russia, yes, in the European Union. But still, there are blockers, group of countries, and these are countries that, they may block and proved to be block the accession progress, given its own national interests, which I disperse, of course, but to aggregate them, they often worry about the cohesion of the European Union, and afraid of importing the kind of bad practices from the new candidates. Also, there are bordering disputes, I've already mentioned. And there is a group of fence-sitters, for example, Spain, Portugal, or Sweden, that actually remain, under the fight, above the fight, and see how the majority votes are distributed. Germany is a really special case. In the European Union, there is the strongest single vote that influence the final decisions at the European Council level, and it's always shifting, from one point to another. And it should be treated as a separate power to be dealt with. So now let me pass the floor to Snezhana and proceed with the methodological issues. Snezhana, welcome.
Okay, thank you, Dmitro, very much. I will be accounting for enlargement methodology and enlargement or negotiation process stages. As you can see on this slide, there is an infographic of the European Commission where this process is divided into 9 stages. Actually, the accession negotiation process is quite complicated and bureaucratic procedure, and this infographic, I would say, is quite simplified, but I will try to elaborate you a little bit about different important stages that should be taken into account by candidate countries, especially by Ukraine. So as you can see on this slide, Ukraine stage 3, since our country obtained a candidate status in June this year. The opening of the accession negotiation does not necessarily follow immediately after granting the candidate status, and as in the case of Ukraine and Moldova and also Western Balkan countries, the start of the negotiations may be conditioned by the fulfillment of a certain criteria. Once the Commission positively assesses that the conditions have been met, and the Council may decide on opening the accession negotiation with a candidate country and invite the Commission to draw up a draft negotiating framework. After unanimous approval of a negotiating framework by the Council, the negotiations can be opened. These are stages 4 and 5 on this infographic. And in my presentation, I would like to unpack precisely stages 5 and 6 and briefly account for the processes hidden behind the approval of the negotiating framework and actual negotiations. Well, actually, why I am, okay, I see already questions here. Why I would like to stop a little bit on the negotiating framework is because of current dispute between Bulgaria and North Macedonia, and this dispute vividly demonstrates us how different member states can jump into the process and influence it. And in the case of North Macedonia as well as Albania, as both cases were coupled, they were in one package, and that's why the process was slowed down for both countries. Returning to the negotiating framework, it is actually the central document of the negotiation process because it establishes the guidelines of the accession negotiations and defines its procedure. It also can include some country-specific points or conditions, usually of a political nature, against which negotiation process will be measured. In the case of Western Balkans, it included a commitment to good neighborly relations. However, in light of the North Macedonia dispute with Bulgaria, the case of North Macedonia actually stands out, as the Council approval of the negotiating framework was delayed for 2 years. And after, in June 2022, France brokered a deal between Bulgaria and North Macedonia aiming to settle the dispute and unblock EU accession negotiation for North Macedonia, a Council approved finally the negotiating framework. But the issue that current negotiating framework for North Macedonia includes or made the accession negotiating progress conditional to North Macedonia implementation of a bilateral treaty with Bulgaria. And firstly, the problem is that considering the different interpretation of this treaty, which actually deals with historical and identity issues, the smooth accession process of North Macedonia can be actually endangered by the Bulgaria veto. And secondly, the problem is that the Commission will now have to monitor the implementation of a bilateral treaty which actually has nothing to do with accession criteria, as I already mentioned, because it deals with issue of history and identity. And actually, this points about inclusion of this treaty into the negotiating framework actually contradicts the revised enlargement methodology, which distinctly says that all parties must abstain from misusing outstanding issues in the EU accession process. So let's then move on to the stage 6, which is the accession negotiations. And the formal commencement of the negotiations takes place at the first intergovernmental conference. This event is important political milestone, but it basically has rather a ceremonial character because at the first conferences, both parties, which means EU and candidate country, present their opening statements EU present negotiating framework, and both parties establishes a screening process. Screening process comes next after the first intergovernmental conferences. And
Danica, I'm very sorry that I'm interrupting you, but I see that Oля Stefanishina joined our event with. It was planned that she will make an introductory remark, but now she will make a remark when we started to speak about the new EU enlargement methodology. Personally, for me, it is the most challenging task. And it's like a symbol that Olha now is working on the most difficult track now. Olha, I am grateful a lot that you find the possibility to join us, that you find a minute in your tight schedule. I knew and I remember that you did and continue to do a lot on our European track, and I will be grateful a lot for your commands that are connected to the experience of Western Balkans. So Oля, I will be grateful for your speech.
Thank you, Luba. Do you hear me? Do you see me well? Is everything fine?
Yeah.
Oh, first and foremost, I'm really, really sorry that I would have to join this event right from from the car, and I'm being a bit late for interrupting the presentation. But I feel myself like in a circle of friends and allies, and whatever we have done over the years before, and especially since the beginning of the full-scale war, everything which has been related to European integration was the art of impossible. And in fact, it would not be possible without strong backing up by civil society, by NGOs, by think tanks, by the team of those who have been there. I remember you were among those first group I have gathered together to start thinking what next after membership application from Ukraine. Indeed, candidate status that we have been granted in June this year has been a political decision, and it's for us as Ukraine and for European Union to pave the way towards the next steps related to enlargement. Of course, the methodology, the general understanding on the steps related to joining the European Union are really common to all of the countries, but practically every country has its own individual history and experience of joining the European Union, because basically it's about the political criteria, it's about the historical consequences, historical circumstances, and of course economic capacity, and what would the country joining the European Union will bring to the single market when it is part of the EU. So of course, in that regard, the recent experience we've been facing right now is the enlargement process in the Western Balkans, which has led to some Balkan countries already being part of the European Union, and some of them enjoy the candidate status, and some of them are already finishing the negotiations. Having the understanding that the historical and political criteria for all of these countries has been the same, each of them enjoyed its own individual track. We understand basically that the process of enlargement related to Ukraine and Moldova has already boosted and transformed the whole enlargement process for the Western Balkans. It has basically brought the real discourse about the enlargement back in the table for the Brussels, and we have been closely coordinating our efforts with the Western Balkan countries in terms of vision related to their enlargement steps and our enlargement stance. So we have been coordinating our efforts within European political community as the initiative presented by President Macron recently. But first and foremost, we of course concentrate on ourselves. We have a very long history of relations of European Union, and basically candidate status has not became a beginning of the process. It has been a completion of a long-lasting process.
It looks like that we lost Olga, maybe because of electricity, maybe because of internet connection. Now we all living in such difficult times that technical issues, we constantly have problems with technical issues, electricity, connection. So it looks like that we lost Olga in terms of speaking. So I propose to Snezhana to continue. Dima, we will be grateful a lot if you can share the presentation on those slides where Snezhana was speaking about the methodology. Snezhana, you have like 5 minutes. I will be grateful if you can be very short with this difficult methodology.
Okay. Can you see the slide well?
Yeah.
So
Perfectly. Thank you. Okay, then I stopped on the screening process. I will briefly account for this because it is a very important stage, as it actually represents the analytical review of the legislation of a candidate country in terms of its alignment with the EU acquis. Why this process is important? Because as a result of the screening, report prepared by the European Commission and unanimously approved by the Council can open the cluster of chapters for negotiations. According to the methodology, the cluster of fundamentals, I will then explain which chapters it includes. It's open first in the negotiations and closes last. And which cluster opens next after the fundamentals, it is basically decided on the basis of the screening process. As a result of screening, European Commission can set opening benchmarks, which are certain conditions that countries should implement which would allow it to open a cluster for negotiations. When it comes to the actual negotiations, it happens after Council green light that opening benchmarks have been met and that countries are ready to negotiate and to implement EU law further. Then the Council may decide to set in closing benchmarks, which is another condition that the countries should fulfill to close the chapter. Actually, it should be emphasized that according to the revised methodology, the cluster of chapters is opened as a whole, and when it comes to the closing of negotiations, the chapter is assessed individually. So it means that candidate country can open, for example, 5 chapters, and it can close only 1 chapter because it's assessed individually. The final stage of the negotiation, it is conclusion on the accession treaty. For it to happen, European Council should confirm that the candidate country fulfills all the commitments, the negotiation of all clusters are completed, and that the country is ready to undertake the obligation of EU membership. The EU member states and the candidate country then conclude a bilateral accession treaty. After being signed by the parties, the treaty should be approved by the European Parliament and ratified by all EU member states and the candidate country. So then next slide, please, because I would like to a little bit elaborate on new methodology. Here you can see the 35 chapters grouped into 6 thematic clusters. A cluster of fundamentals open first. It also includes Copenhagen criteria such as economic criteria and also criteria on functioning of democratic institutions and public administration reform. And basically it is important cluster for negotiation. And please, next slide, because actually it determines the pace of the negotiation. And then two slides, please, because as we have limited time, I would like to jump to next slide and one more slide. So here for cluster of fundamentals, the Commission and then the Council can set not only opening benchmarks, which for this cluster should be in the form of action plans for fulfillment of reforms in terms of democratic functioning of democratic institution and also judiciary reforms. For this cluster, European Commission also can set interim benchmarks, and it is very likely to happen for Ukraine as well. It actually represents some conditions beside the implementation of the EU acquis. This can be a track record of reform or any other issue that can actually influence the further implementation of the EU acquis by the candidate country. And what is important here is that interim benchmarks, until the country is implementing the interim benchmarks, it cannot close any chapter of the negotiating process, any chapter out of 35. So this is very important to take into account for Ukraine, because actually if there is a stalemate or backdrop in implementing of the interim benchmarks, there will be slowdown of the negotiation as a whole. Then we come to closing benchmarks. This is another condition that should be demonstrated by the candidate country. It should be demonstrated that candidate country is implementing reforms, necessary reforms, and as a result of it, as a result of positive assessment of the European Commission, it can be decided that negotiation is closed. This cluster should be closed last, so none of the cluster can be deemed completed until the country is implemented all the necessary conditions in the fundamental clusters. So for my part is this is all, and I invite Dmytro to continue with the conclusions. Thank you.
Dima, I will be grateful if you pass.
Yes, I will be super fast, Luba. Yeah, thank you, Snezhana. Apart from purely methodological issues, we indeed investigated the 4 cases of the Western Balkans countries that are current candidates. And here we summarize the main, I guess, 10 or 8 recommendations, however. And to say the core things for the Balkans experience, first, one may say that there is an obvious chance of the century for Ukraine. I mean, to become the EU member. So the geopolitical situation is extremely favorable now. The country got the candidacy status. But in the meantime, we must prepare ourselves for quite a rocky accession pathway. So to say that we will be on the fast track, or I don't know, receive a kind of exception from the updated EU accession methodology, it will be not true. So that's our personal expert opinion. So this way will be quite hard and complicated, and will require, in the meantime, first the strong political consensus. So regarding the strategic course of European integration and stability of democratic institutions. So these 2 factors played quite a key role in the Western Balkans experience. So because, you know, political up and downs regarding the European integration, they played a bad service for Balkans countries and political leaders. and deterioration of democratic institutions, so like the distribution balance of power inside the country between different branches, or deterioration of freedom of media, civil society sector, etc., etc. They also was heavily criticized by Brussels and played a bad service for the candidates. Rule of law reforms, especially anti-corruption and judicial system reforms, must be the top priority at all levels. So, because Snezhana already mentioned that they play a crucial role in the new enlargement methodology, and of course, Ukraine must demonstrate quite tangible results, specifically in these chapters. And it's important that Ukraine will take quite strong commitment and demonstrate quite strong track record in implementing of the European Union key agenda. So, because there will be a cornerstone of the Commission screenings, etc., other progress points. Also quite important that Ukraine would organize direct and strong outreach to skeptical EU member states. So, because the Balkans experience shows that when neglecting this point, you are you are in a permanent risk to receive a block-in veto from the skeptics at the level of European Council, and these vetoes are often difficult to overcome. So it takes enormous amount of time afterwards. And if you are in a clash with skeptics, it would lead you to enlargement fatigue, as well as inside the EU and inside your home country. Last three recommendations are about institutions mainly, and methodology. So needless to say that strong institutions, especially the ones that deal with the European integration things and coordination of the related reforms, that should be strong. So here I mean strong from political point of view. Yeah, our authorities should have a strong voice at the Commission level and EU member states governments, and to be able to overcome the new enlargement methodology hurdles, yes, you know, in a cooperative way. Yes, because if you are in a conflict with the official EU institutions or influential member states, it will stuck your progress. As well as block of purely administrative issues play quite substantial role. So again, education training of civil servants, reform of state authorities functions, even you know, technical facilities, equipment, even requirements to the governmental offices buildings. So everything was taken into account when the Balkans started its accessions, and it should be resolved in Ukraine as well. And the last recommendation that Ukraine must demonstrate some quick wins already, even prior to opening the accession negotiations. And it would help the country to shorten the list of interim benchmarks in rule of law chapters, which are extremely difficult to come through, as Snezhana mentioned, and it will serve a good service, yes, for us, if we talk about the speed of accession. So there are plenty of other lessons and recommendations, and I welcome you to find them in our paper that will be released just after our presentation. Thank you so much. So I stop sharing here, and we are open for other speakers. and
Thank you,
questions and questions afterwards.
Thank you, Dima. Now I have a feeling that all the members of our discussion will remember 3 words: opening benchmarks, interim benchmarks, and closing benchmarks. So it's like not so easy if this methodology will be applied for Ukraine. I would like to stress that it will be impossible for us to make this research without the help of our great EU friend, Borja Lacheras, who is famous Spanish expert. Personally, I believe that such cooperation with EU experts who are commenting our researches, helping us, they will help us to receive good EU supporters in EU countries. Personally, now I am speaking about Spain. So I would like to invite to make a speech Borja Lacheras, who is a senior fellow with the Transatlantic Defense and Security Program at the Center for European Policy. Borja, we know that you studied Western Balkans for many years, and I would like to ask you 2 questions, if you do not reject. First question is, what from your European point of view 2 biggest mistakes were made by Western Balkans? And if you can make some correlation with Ukraine, that Ukraine should avoid them. And my second question is about methodology, because for the last several days, when I was reading this information about these benchmarks, I realized that the process will be challenging, and maybe potentially there is a time to start a discussion with EU how this methodology can be simplified, or there is possibility for such a discussion, or it's a little bit dangerous to start such a discussion. So it is my point of view, Ukrainian, typically Ukrainian, but we need to hear your European voice. I will be grateful.
Доброго дня, колеги. І, по-перше, знім української мови, так? Happy Ukrainian Language Day. So, it was a pleasure to work with you guys, and a lot of respect for the fact that you came out with this report against the clock in the midst of blackouts, missiles and unjustifiable things. So double kudos to you, and I think the report, as colleagues will be seeing, it's very good. Now, on your question of biggest mistakes, I mean, it's hard to identify just one single issue that stood on the way, but perhaps my main message to Ukraine will be this, the importance of the fundamentals, and focus on the cluster of fundamentals, that is justice reform, rule of law, and the functionality of democratic institutions. And I mentioned that because sometimes in the Western Balkans there was this attitude by the elites to do this sort of tick of the list, like they were like passing reforms, but sometimes they never really implemented them. So ticking off the list doesn't work. You need to walk the talk. And sometimes in some elites, not all, but some elites in the Balkans, they talk the talk, but they never walk the European walk. And this doesn't go unnoticed by the screening institutions, the European Commission, but also European Parliament and the other members of the European Union. So that will be my biggest recommendation. I think the importance of the fundamentals and the actual reform implementation. And that's, I have to say, this is of the many challenges that Ukraine faces. This is one challenge because it pertains to this, essential reforms on rule of law, judicial reform, with which Ukraine has been struggling since the Revolution of Dignity. Granted, there's been progress, but this is a pending, like one of the biggest blocks where reforms are needed. And then, obviously, I think it has been mentioned, the challenge of the growing bilateralism of enlargement. I mean, member states, neighbor countries, they add conditions to the process, and that adds to the complexity of enlargement. I think the case of Bulgaria with Northern Macedonia, it's a case in point. So not only in Northern Macedonia, not for Bulgaria, but Northern Macedonia had to reform its name, but then the Bulgarians came up with a long list of additional requests, which eventually made it to conditions, and that's I'm afraid that will become a reality in the process, and it hampers even good students, so to speak, good or candidate countries that are actually doing the hard work. So in the case of Ukraine, no doubt Hungary will be a problem, but maybe not the only one. So in this vein, yeah, another perhaps lesson from the Western Balkans is that some of the leads were burnishing the European flag as a sort of, okay, it's us, it's elites, or it's the Russians or the Chinese or what have you, gaining a foothold in the Western Balkans, which of course some elites in the EU use it as a chance to, okay, we need to speed up the process, otherwise the Western Balkans will fall and become a sort of Russian stronghold. Things are obviously more complicated, but I think the one lesson learned here is that geopolitics does not substitute for full-fledged transformation, democratic credentials, and Europeanization. Geopolitics is important, but geopolitics is not enough when the screening institutions need to look at actual deliverables. Obviously, sometimes there are political decisions taken. In my view, with Serbia, we keep on taking political decisions, even though the country is actually going backward in a number of criteria. But this is to say that obviously geopolitics played a role, but not only in granting the candidate status of Ukraine, but it will not be enough. So you mentioned, Liuba, about this methodology. I think I tried to answer some of the methodological aspects. I'm not sure this can be. Obviously, the negotiating framework matters a great deal, and this is a subject of an ongoing discussion with the candidate country. But I go back to my previous comment that if a candidate country does what it takes, and that, I mean, the reforms, etc., then some of these benchmarks might be complicated, etc. But there's like a credible path of reform adoption and reform implementation. Then these hurdles are not so big hurdles. Still, you have political hurdles, but this is not. So maybe not. Maybe what I'm trying to say is not less. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's important not to be obsessed with the methodology. And some concluding thoughts. Yeah, maybe my thoughts for Ukrainians would be, don't obsess with the end game. I mean, the process is as important, because the process pertains to the wholesale transformation, in this case of Ukraine, into a more democratic, normal European country. And that was the promise of the revolution of dignity. So the end game matters, but the process itself has benefits if properly conducted, and that's actually the real task, the process. You guys have mentioned pedagogy or outreach to other EU member states, to institutions. I think it's important, and that's another lesson learned from the Western Balkans, is to do outreach with the Ukrainian public and do sustained pedagogical effort with the Ukrainian public, because enlargement is not a cherry cake. There are winners and losers. Ultimately, most people win for being part of the EU, but there are tough choices along the way. There will be sectors that will be affected with some of the reforms, and it's important that there's socioeconomic incentives and socioeconomic reforms actually that can help with these sectors that will be affected to cope with challenge. So outreach to the public, and I think this is it from my side. I agree, this is a great opportunity for Ukraine, and also it's a great opportunity for Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Borja, for your honest feedback. And now I would like to start a discussion with representatives of Ukrainian government, not government, I see that parliament and office of the president. First of all, I am also grateful to you, Mikhailo and Andriy, that you find the possibility to speak with us, since I know that you both are working a lot on our Euro-integration track. You had a possibility to hear our key findings that at the moment we managed to analyze, to hear the main challenges, and I would like to hear your point of view. How do you think, are these challenges relevant to Ukraine now, and what practically you are doing on those positions that you have now on our Euro-integration track? I would like to invite Mikhailo Latensky, who is advisor to the chairman of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. Mikhailo, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I would even say good afternoon, dear colleagues. Do you hear me well?
Yes, yes.
Good. Let me first thank you for this opportunity to attend, though virtually, this, I would say, analytically important event, and talk about current challenges and opportunities for Ukraine on its way towards full-fledged membership with the European Union. And let me start by saying that granting candidate status to Ukraine in June 2022 was both important and worthwhile step taken by the European Union. And though we were given candidate status at a record speed, it is logical that the accession process will not be as swift, and the set criteria are not that easy for any candidate country to meet, since candidate countries are required to fulfill numerous conditions and to harmonize their rules and standards to that of the European Union. And as it has been correctly mentioned during the first part of this presentation of your study, yes, the Union's capacity to absorb new members shall be sufficient enough as well. The study presented today is very illustrative of how the EU accession and enlargement process vary from state to state. And the Balkans region is no exception either. So basically only Croatia as a country, yes, managed to become a member of the European Union. Then Montenegro, which has been negotiating accession for exactly 10 years, yes, and until now has closed only 3 negotiation chapters, plus this glaring example of North Macedonia, which became a candidate at the same time as Croatia, but could not start negotiations for 17 years, yes, due to the well-known blocking reasons of its neighboring countries. And then after negotiating for 8 years, Serbia has opened 18 chapters, yes, out of 35 in total, provisionally closing only 2 of them. So the question is, are those countries the best role model to follow except Croatia? So basically, definitely not. And this only evidences the fact that as currently devised, this accession process is long-lasting, yes, it's complex, and it's ridden with uncertainties. And there is no unique recipe or magic formula to follow. And while we're trying to compare ourselves with the Balkan states, it is worth emphasizing that we have an association agreement, yes, that is much more progressive in terms of integration into the European Union single market than those stabilization and association agreements the Balkan states had. In particular, our association agreement already provides for certain elements of the internal market treatment with the European Union in such sectors as electronic communications, then maritime transportation, postal services, and financial services. Then we have this unique opportunity to conclude the agreement on conformity assessment and acceptance of industrial products. plus this, I would say, unprecedented in nature Annex 27, which opened for Ukraine the possibility for deeper sectoral integration in the energy sector, yes, and introduced this unique for third states mechanism for consultations with the EU on the issues of compatibility of legislative initiatives with the provisions of the European Union law. And then, while comparing Ukraine with Baltic states, there's another big difference in size of countries and a number of population, comparing, let's say, Ukraine with North Macedonia or even Montenegro. So basically, what I'm trying to imply is that while we are trying to extrapolate, yes, the experience of Western Balkans countries on Ukraine, it seems quite logical to talk about a differentiated approach, yes, and a very special vector for Ukraine. Therefore, I would rather speak not about the experience of a single country, yes, within the Baltic regions, but rather about the approaches and principles that the European Union adheres to during the integration of those states, yes, into its political and economic space. So basically, the merit-based approach still remains a central pillar, yes, and that means that a candidate country has to deliver. It also needs to utilize all available political fora, including association institutions such as Association Council, Association Committee, subcommittees, and clusters, yes, in addition to intergovernmental conference, which is yet to be opened up. And those mechanisms have been in Ukraine's arsenal for a long time, since 2014, and there would always be two intrinsically connected components of the EU integration process: the political and the technical ones. But any political part of the process must be eventually supported and underpinned by the technical work carried out. So it's about utilizing available resources and doing our utmost for this utmost, yes, to be applied during political intercourse. And respect to the second question, Luba, about what is happening right now at the parliament level, I just want to be very brief and to say that the candidate status with the European Union has triggered massive transformation processes of the EU integration activities and the way we deal with the draft laws targeted at EU integration. So basically now each draft law which is targeted at adaptation of the national legislation to EU acquis, it shall be accompanied by the relevant tables of concordance. Yes, I mean article by article analysis of its compliance with the draft acquis, plus the relevant translation of piece of legislation of EU law into the Ukrainian language. And also the parliament is doing pretty much good in terms of fulfillment of those 7 recommendations given to Ukraine by the EU Commission, yes, in June 2022. So basically we already elected 2 members of the High Council of Justice, plus we adopted 2 laws with respect to implementation of the FAT standards. Then we have also adopted in the first reading the draft law on procedure for the selection of the judges to the Constitutional Court of Ukraine. And also we are getting draft law on media to be prepared for its second reading by the end of this month. So again, I can proceed with this for a long time, but I think it's high time I give the floor to Andrius Klar, because again, we are limited in time. So again, thanks for giving me the floor, Luba.
Thank you, Mikhailo, for your comprehensive speech. And you know, I remembered 2014 when we as think tank were like start our way of advocating EU legislation, and you know, we were like lonely in this field because it was very difficult to receive any support in the parliament. And every time when I was speaking with different people, I was stressing that we need to make EU integration on the top political priority. Only in such case, when all the institutions will put it as high priority and will control the process and will mobilize resources, we can implement this task successfully. And now I see that Ukraine started to do this. These things that European integration is becoming a top priority. This is a good sign for me, and I believe that we will have enough resources in terms of people, because now, as I like to say, that now we can rely only on the young men who cannot leave the country, because now we have problems with people. So I will believe that we will have enough resources, enough people to fulfill all the tasks that now we face. So thank you, Mikhail. And now I would like to invite Andriy, who is representing the who is the deputy head of the Department for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration, Office of the President of Ukraine. Office of the President is also making an important role now in all the European integration processes. So, Andriy, the floor is yours.
Hello. Do you hear me?
Yes, yeah. We can.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank the co-organizers of this important discussion for having such important topic, because true that EU integration is, let's say, on the line, so it's a topic of interest of our society, not only political part, but general society. Secondly, I would like to thank for inviting me as representative of Presidential Office to take part in this event and to speak up. And thirdly, I would like to particulate the importance of such good work on searching for experience of Western Balkans, of their path of those candidate countries towards EU membership. Speaking about the important question of approaching towards EU for Ukraine, I would like to particulate that in case of Western Balkans, we are extremely thankful for Albania, Montenegro, and North Macedonia, because those countries at official level, so their prime ministers, signed in summer open letter in support of granting Ukraine candidate status. And it was a real sign of support, because at the period of negotiating with EU member states on question of having candidate status, it was many times kind of caution that maybe it's not a time to apply for EU membership. Maybe it is a kind of a line, so you shall wait until Western Balkans will be on board, etc., etc. But the clear message from those countries which are now in status of candidate was really good help for us, and a sign that European integration process is not like wait and see, is a really case for each and every country, and it depends only on this or that exact state, for how long they will negotiate, what would be the outcome, will they be finally in the EU, or they shall wait until some political and other things will be settled. Then it is important also to note that the experience of Western Balkans, as well as experience of previous ways of enlargement, is useful indeed. And we shall work on it, we must have lessons learned, etc. But nowadays, as you will know, we have a factor of extreme importance. Is a hot war ongoing on our soil. In a situation of a hot war, we were granting with a candidate status. So it's a unique and historical decision. But on the other hand, it proves that there will be a concession of Ukrainian society to go towards EU despite all odds, despite all challenges, including security challenges. And we also see ongoing war and fight for our independence on one hand as the greatest challenge. I can hardly name another EU candidate or member country which faced such path. But on the other hand, it is a window of opportunity. As you can see, the historical decision of granting candidate status in such a short period of time, and now implementing 7 recommendations of European Commission with a view to step up to the next and qualitative new level of beginning accession talks with all relevant components. So summing up, I would like to say that indeed we have to look through deeply, and this research on Western Balkans is very helpful in this regard. But on the other hand, we need to unite our forces, our efforts, and I think that the Verkhovna Rada, Cabinet of Ministers, Presidential Office, each and every line ministry are on the same page now, and hopefully we will move on with the help and assistance of our good friends, EU member states, and also with our partner nations like countries of Western Balkans, which are also our friends in this regard. Thank you for attention.
Andriy, I'm grateful a lot for your speech. And now I have a feeling that you were speaking with Mikhailo like according to the recommendations that we delivered in our research, because our research is developed near 2 pillars. First one is political circumstances, and in this pillar we describe that it is very important to deliver this bilateral track with EU countries, because they can come to the negotiation process and to ask EU Commission to include some very strange and specific demands that we should implement, and maybe potentially they will never be connected with EU acquis. So this field is very important. So, and I am grateful that you are thinking in this direction. While Mikhailo was speaking about another track, technical track, that is very important to deliver this methodology. We also have here Ivan Nahornyak, who is the advisor to Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration. I know that Ivan visited Western Balkan countries several weeks ago, and he has his fresh experience. So we were grateful. I will be grateful a lot if you can share your findings, and particularly we were asking all Ukrainian speakers to think about challenges that Western Balkans faced before and how much they are relevant to our current situation. So Ivan, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great. So thank you for invitation and for opportunity to discuss such a relevant topic, because really, as you have mentioned, I was in the Western Balkans just several weeks ago together with the New Europe Center, and I have 3 main points that I would like to raise during my speech. But first of all, I would say that it is very hard to say something new after the presentation of your colleagues, and of course after such a good speech notes from my previous speakers like Andriy Sklar, especially his last points regarding the political circumstances that we are right now in and we are dealing with, and we have to take it into account when we are discussing the Western Balkans experience. First of all, when we were visiting the Croatia and other countries, because Croatia, why we visited Croatia, because this is the last a country that joined the European Union in 2013, and we discussed with diplomats, with people who are working for the government, wherever how do they feel the change, and what do they think was good or bad in their negotiations, accession negotiations. So first of all, I would raise the point of communication. The support among the society during the accession negotiations will change. Of course, right now we have 90% of support from our society, but we as a government and other branches of power don't need to take it into as a granted. I think that we have to work on this and also to deliver the message that the European integration, as President said during his speech in Verkhovna Rada in July, that it is right now not only the foreign policy of Ukraine, but it is internal policy of Ukraine. And what challenges it brings for us, for business society, in terms of implementation of the EU acquis. So first of all, the communication with society. The second point is the state of play of, and I would say, modalities of consultations with civil society during the all-over accession process. What I'm talking about. For example, we can take Montenegro. During negotiation process, they opened almost all chapters, and more than 700 people together with civil society are involved in these negotiations teams and different working groups. I, in my own opinion, don't think that this is an effective way to conduct negotiations. I think that civil society, especially those one who are dealing with some sectoral things, should be involved. And of course, there will be broad consultations, but this things is right now under discussion. So I think maybe this is also will be good question for panelists and other people who will be active during this discussion to raise the question how to organize the consultations with civil society and other stakeholders. What are the best, I would say, model of conducting such a consultations? And the third point that I would like to raise is that we have to avoid well-known possibilities expectations gap. What I'm talking about is that, of course, everyone wants Ukraine to become member as soon as possible. We have a very good political will from the president of Ukraine. We have completely, I would say, readiness in the governmental side to do whatever it takes to bring Ukraine into the European Union. But we have also to understand that, first of all, we have to take into account the current state of play of our economy. We have to take into account what is going on with our business society. We, of course, have to take into account our institutional capacities. And talking about that, for example, we was in different countries, but more or less, according to estimations, 2,000 people from the different branches of power and executive authorities were involved in Western Balkans, in every country in Western Balkans, in the negotiation and accession process. Of course, they were changed and so on, but still, it is, I think, very big amount of people that were involved in this process. Regarding the political message, I would say that before the 2022, I, as the scientists and political scientists was completely, in my opinion, the European enlargement policy was completely stagnating. And what happened with Ukraine, and in June 2022 makes this new, I would say, new breath to the enlargement policy. And thank you, Luba, and all of the participants for really raising the question of what to do with the enlargement policy, because as you may know, the Western Balkans here is not a good example. There are some member states that really use the enlargement process to maybe to pressure the candidate country in terms of some political, I would say, aims. So we have to avoid this issue. And the key to avoiding this issue is in the new enlargement methodology or reviewing the enlargement methodology. Thank you very much. I will be happy to answer your questions and ready for discussion.
Thank you, Ivan. Now I see that you are counting people, so I hope that our country is really technically preparing for this way. I know that politically we like to say fast. We as experts are afraid to say fast because after these benchmarks, I'm very accurate with phrases that are connecting to speed. But anyway, I see that on all the branches, you demonstrate the deep understanding of the issue and of the problem. So now I want to move to the session of questions, and I see in the chat one question, and I encourage all the other members who joined as not as speakers and as members to write questions, and I can announce them. So I see the first question: are there set time periods for screening? I think that this question is to our team. Maybe Snezhana can answer on the question about screening. Is there a particular period for screening, or it's like a free period? Snezhana, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. So basically, the screening starts after the first intergovernmental conference. For example, in the case of Albania and North Macedonia, the first inaugural screening meeting took place just after this conference. And afterwards, the parties can just establish the next screening process, because I think actually the screening includes 3 stages. The first one, this is explanatory screening, during which EU side presents all EU acquis, all EU law that candidate country needs to implement. And during this stage, candidate country has a chance to familiarize itself with all the specifics of the EU law. Afterwards, there is bilateral screening when the candidate country presents its reports on its alignment with the EU law, and afterwards Commission produces screening reports. So actually this is as Western Balkan case demonstrates, screening process or timetable for screenings just established during the bilateral meetings, and I think it is quite a flexible timetable. Maybe our colleague from Ukrainian government can complement me, because they are practitioners and they are already, I think, taking a good eye on all the stages of the accession negotiations.
Ivan just wrote me that he had another call with EU Commission, so he will not have a possibility to answer the question on screening. So at least we managed to answer from our side, and I see that Maria Haliti wants to put a question. So if we can provide her a possibility to ask in a live, Maria, you can ask.
Hello, everybody. Actually, I would like to agree with the speakers that Ukraine and Western Balkans could not be compared because actually we have completely different history. Having been analyzing Balkans for many years, what I've learned that Western Balkans started the negotiation process with the EU during Yugoslavia times. Then the conflicts stopped this process, and of course, after the dissolution of Yugoslavia, different countries having different economic and other capacities, they joined EU. Some like Slovenia joined right after, other later. Some still in the negotiation process. But what I want to say that Western Balkans were promised to be a part of the EU. And actually, it is because of war, because of conflicts, the process was so long. Ukraine never was promised to be a member, and now we have this chance. And my understanding that we have to put all efforts to continue with this process as fast as possible. It is a big task for government, it is a big task for parliament, but also for civil society. And my opinion that we have to work together, I mean civil society, and try to support government with the all policies, and maybe civil society can take some role in this. Maybe we can divide different areas, divide different our roles, and try to support government. And basically, Isariya Dnanya as sub-granting organization can also consider maybe some program for civil society to help actually to develop necessary policies and necessary reforms. If you have some suggestion how we can help civil society and government, because we mostly can provide sub-granting only to civil society, we are open to discuss this. But I think that we need to use this opportunity and do everything possible, like to have EU membership in 1 year, or okay, a little bit longer, but not too much, because if we wait long, we might lose this opportunity. Thank you.
Maria, I want to react because here we are in a circle of friends, and our speakers are also those people who support the Euro integration processes in Ukraine. But I have a little bit another point of view. I'm afraid to use the phrases that this process should be fast. While inside my heart, I want it to be fast, and I will explain you why. Maybe Dmytro will help me to support my position. First of all, I agree with you that historically we are now in absolutely another situation, and we were not trying even to compare this situation. Our task was to compare this technical track that usually EU is applying for candidate countries, and currently for this particular moment, there is no alternative for this EU track. And only after you analyze this track, you will understand that currently it's impossible to pass this track in 1 or 2 years. And I just do not want we to popularize this idea in our society, because after 2 years, when potentially we will not become a member, our citizens will be not happy with this fact. Now I see personally, for me, the biggest challenge for us, except of the political circumstances, because I see that now we have 2 tracks, as I mentioned before, political track and technical track. So we need to work on these both tracks. But for me, technical track is the most challenging, Maria, because you cannot imagine how difficult it is to work if you are constantly implementing different benchmarks, opening, intermediate, closing. And when we were discussing this issue with other experts from EU side, because we want to receive a frank feedback, we understand that currently it is not so easy to change this methodology. And I think that, yes, that politicians should use the idea of fast track, but we as people who are working with details, we have time to analyze details. We should be very accurate with this. We are ready to help. We are ready to support government, parliament. But if we want it to become fast, we should understand is currently there is a real possibility to change this methodology, because we received a feedback from some of the EU experts that if Ukraine now starts a discussion that methodology should be simplified, we will ruin the consensus that now exists between current EU member states. So this issue is very sensitive. It is a very challenging task for us. I mean, this new EU enlargement methodology that was applied in 2020. And now we need to think and to work on this track, not to use a word to simplify a methodology, and maybe, I do not know, maybe to start a discussion on this issue and do not use phrases when speaking with them about fast track, because I think that we will not reach a result, since for this track, it is very important, fundamental part. I do not know if I deliver my message correctly, but I see that Borja wants also to express.
I just would like to add, you know, we have this experience, for example, with Romania. Romania, when it started negotiation process, it was not in good shape, but it managed to be an EU member. We have to find a way for Ukraine not to set enormous requirements, but just sufficient requirements. Also, I just forgot to mention about public consultation. There was a question about public consultation, and I suggest at least to have public consultations with civil society and private sector. As example, how these consultations can be arranged, we have two good examples. For example, how was developed the national strategy for barrier-free environment, and second, national strategy for promoting civil society development, 2021-2026. It's a good example. Yes, it required some sources. It requires maybe somebody runs this process, maybe civil society organization can partner with government and do this. And we are ready to consider how to support it. But it is a good example how any document or anything could be discussed with civil society and citizens if they want to join it.
Thank you, Maria, but I will now give the floor to Borja because he wants also to to make his comment. You know, the problem is that the situation was extremely changed and in 2020 with this methodology, and if to speak about all other countries, Romania, Bulgaria, currently it is not relevant now because they moved a fast track, and Western Balkans were those countries where this fast track was not applied. And currently, I think that we should be very accurate with any fast tracks, because EU was not satisfied with fast track that was used to Romania and Bulgaria. So Borja, I will be grateful for your reaction.
Yeah, thank you very much, Liva. You basically advanced some of the things that I wanted to say. The so-called fast track, first of all, is not realistic, and also secondly, it's just Ukraine is not ready for this, fast track itself. It needs to carry out with reforms that have been very difficult in times of peace/war. I mean, after the Maidan revolution, and they're gonna be difficult. And I agree that pushing on form and fast track actually risks spending the huge political capital that Ukraine has acquired. But anyway, the challenge is for Ukraine society as state. So I think it's very useful, some of the comments I heard from Ukrainian government officials about the expectations and capabilities gap. I think it's an important discussion that needs to be carried forward. Point number two, when excuse me, when I was approached to discuss the Western Balkans, etc., and my colleagues in the think tank know that I was trying to emphasize some comparisons that are fitting and some differences, but I don't agree, Maria, with some comments you've made that these countries' long enlargement process because of war. That is actually not correct. Some of these countries actually obtained independence at the same time of the Ukraine. I mean, the early 90s. First of all. Two, Albania was never party to any conflict, and yeah, it was affected by the conflict in Kosovo, but it was not party to any war, and it has been doing actually very good in recent years. So I think it's a country where we can all learn a lot. Same with Montenegro. Montenegro was part of the Yugoslav Federation, but was it a party to the conflict is still disputable. So there are actually, even though I've been playing devil's advocate in this process, that Ukraine is a case in point and is different to Western Balkans, actually there's some similarities. First of all, the legacy of communism, to the role of elites, clientele elites that actually took over the state assets to the point that public assets were confiscated, etc. The role of oligarchs, and the role of spoilers handling reform. So these are areas where actually there's some comparisons that can be made, but I agree that yes, obviously Ukraine is a case in point. It has its own strategic relevance, and it has its own path that it has to carve out. Thank you.
That Dmytro wants also to add something. Yes, Dima?
Yes, correct. Let me make also some kind of reflection. Speaking with European experts in the field, so I personally perceived that the European Union will never repeat a story like with Bulgaria and Romania, when the countries was a need to fulfill the post membership conditions, and it was quite a bad experience for the European Union. Also, colleagues already mentioned that insisting on the fast track, we would be in risk of to get into the enlargement fatigue, and is a very dangerous phenomenon already experienced by the Western Balkan countries. Instead of proposing the dramatical amendments to the European Union enlargement methodology, which is per se would be quite long, difficult, comprehensive process inside the European Union. I would say we would argue better for development of a sophisticated accession plan, mutually recognized by Ukraine and the European Union, and probably even in its regional dimension, applicable for the Western Balkans acceding countries. The idea is just to critically assess the situation of integration on sector-by-sector basis, and just to understand in which sectors it should be fast-track successes. Yeah, there are really some sectors or champions, possible champions. And for other one to understand that, okay, we need a kind of gradual integration or a system of concessions, because of even prior to the war, some sectors were extremely difficult for full-scale implementation, like energy, environment, etc. And now war inflicted severe damage to sectors. So again, energy that should be overcome now with given the support of the European Union. So the situation even more difficult now that we had before February 22. And yeah, we would lobby for wise planning approach and support by the European Union in terms of assistance funds or other quick recovery resources. So it's just my personal expert opinion.
Yeah, I think, Maria, that two approaches are applicable. We just have a little bit another point of view, because as researchers, I support Dima. When we started, Maria, to prepare our regular job with monitoring report, we understand that in each sectors we have lots of problems. And now we need to work a lot to help, to provide Ukraine help in each sector, because now situation is even worse than it was before, because lots of infrastructure is ruined, even in telecom sector that I always considered as the most successful according to our estimations. So I think that government, Office of the President, some other NGOs can push the idea of fast track, but we also can simultaneously push another idea. I am sure that now we want to estimate several sectors according to the association agreement, and to understand in what sectors we can receive fast wins. At least I hope that we can receive fast wins. And if it is impossible to receive fast wins in other sectors, what help Ukraine should receive from EU side? Financial, legal, expert help, and the same way we want to think what immediate tasks Ukraine should implement to receive all the resources to be capable to move on this fast track. So we as experts, we just are afraid that now asking about fast track, we will not have just a possibility to cope with this fast track, and we are thinking only about this issue. Marie, if you want if you have a reaction, so you're welcome.
I do agree with your word that we need to implement a lot of things. We need to assess situation which we have, but basically I am talking from international relation point of view. We need to use opportunity and work hard to speed up process as much as possible. It's not a question that we need to not to implement reform, that we need to do not to do things which we have to do, but the question that we need to unite efforts and to do what is possible to be a part of EU. Because if you lose this opportunity, we will never have it again. It's like, it is very important for us all understand that, okay, if we have lack of resources, we need to think where to find these resources to speed up the process. But it doesn't mean that we have to exclude important elements or we have to somehow try to contradict with the EU. We need to build our collaboration. And maybe, yes, we need to negotiate about some simplification, about some benefits for us. But we have to be united to have this process completed.
I agree, Maria, that we have to be united. The only difference between us is that our think tank for many years was working deeply with all this technical part of the association agreement, and that's why we are trying to be very accurate with any phrases that are connected to the time implementation. But I agree that now it's a historical moment, and we need to use it. So we also have lots of ideas how we can move on this track, and we are ready to discuss it with you. Thank you, Maria, for your it was not a question, it was a reaction that, like a stimulated a discussion between all of us. I do not see questions in our chat. I just see from Maria Shevchuk that about the date when negotiation can be started. So yes, so currently we do not know. As I understood, at the end of this year, we will receive the report of EU how Ukraine is implementing the demands in the framework of the candidacy status, and I think that after this report, we will understand precisely when negotiations can be started. Now, okay, now I see the question. Oh, Mamma Mia, so many questions. We should.
Luba, let me answer this. So I already read them. Yeah, hello, Uliana. So basically, I answered about the second part of your question. So regarding waiting for membership for decades and applying change to the accession process. So I guess I was so more or less persuasive in my previous answer to the previous question. So if you talk about the notion that Western Balkans story is about the geopolitical struggle between the European Union, Russia, China, yes, that's true. You know, these geopolitical peers of the European Union, yes, they really used, yes, the situation of enlargement fatigue and the outcomes of the stability crisis policy that the official Brussels employed over the recent decade. Of course, geopolitics, you know, is a key pusher of the story, and it always will be. So now, I guess. The influence of Russian Chinese networks it will be diminishing. So because yes, they lost a bit a moment now after Russia's full-scale invasion into Ukraine. But on the other hand, even if we know that EU accession or enlargement is a political undertaking rather than a technical one, indeed, yes, but you know, the European Commission here, you know, with its technical function, it serves more like equidistance arbiter role, and it usually backs up the political consensus, yes, inside the European Union. And what we will see now, what we can see now, all this complicated story for enlargement methodology, etc. You know, is a result of consensus. Yes, and we each time. We need to understand that the European Commission serves to this purpose, just to promote enlargement and to take into account and balance all the disparate interests of the individual member states. So now situation is extremely favorable for Ukraine because the biggest EU major single EU member states, they are in favor of enlargement and they took this decision. So, and it will be a push now for Ukraine, for the Western Balkans region, and we all need to use this, I mean, historical and geopolitical opportunity to progress for inside the accession track. So if you talk about the prospects of Eastern Partnership Initiative, so there are still no unified consensus on it. So it's understandable now that this initiative is more dead than alive now. But what will replace it? Frankly speaking, nobody knows. It's only understandable that it should be some kind of replacement in terms of cooperation framework. So probably the recently initiated European Political Community Initiative will replace and unite the new European Union strategic partners that are current candidates. So maybe it will be some new initiative. We don't know. So definitely this initiative should develop somehow. So because we are as a candidates bloc need to cooperate with each other. Thank you.
Now I received the message. Now I see that we should finish our discussion because according to the program we should finish 24 minutes ago. And now I see that our second speaker decided to join us, Florian Bieber, who also helped us to develop the research. But before giving the word to Florian, I want to react also to the question of Uliana that the track that Western Balkans passed was very complicated, and they were waiting for the membership for the decade. I agree absolutely with this phrase, and now I support the idea that we need to move some progressive issues like idea of gradual integration that was developed by Michael Emerson. But we always should remember that now we are not alone. Now we are in one basket with Western Balkans. And if we are asking something to simplify or to change, we should be like one voice with these countries, because it will be like not fair concerning them, since before they were implementing this methodology difficult, and now we will ask like special track for Ukraine not to implement it. So I think that we should be accurate to express something alone. We should be together. So Florian, I'm grateful that you managed to join our discussion. And I am grateful that you helped us to develop a research. And I would like to ask you such a question that was raised now among the guests of our event, that Ukraine should seek for fast track. In case Ukraine will not do it, we will never enter the EU. So I want to receive your reaction, your feedback. What are the possibilities for Ukraine to become a member of EU in a I do not know, 3-4 years, to make this process fast and not so long as it was in case of Western Balkans? Thank you.
Thanks for giving me the floor. I apologize for being late. I've got the time zones confused a little bit between Kiev time and Austrian time. But to answer your question briefly, I mean, I think 3-4 years is completely unrealistic for membership for Ukraine, as for any country. It's a very long process. And I think there is no such thing as a fast track process for any country. And I think we have to be quite honest about that, because to join the EU requires adopting the acquis and negotiating all the laws and rules with the European Union, and the EU wants to make sure that those are really implemented, and that can't happen so quickly. So the full membership is a long-term process. It shouldn't be as long as it has been for the Western Balkans, and certainly a lesson to learn for Ukraine is that this long 20 years without results is not helpful for the country, because people lose the enthusiasm, and the EU also forgets why they started the process. In the Balkans, they forgot that it was about preventing further wars in the Balkans, why they started it 20 years ago. So this memory will fade, and the memory of the war in Ukraine will fade in 10 years, and the EU will forget why it offered membership to Ukraine. So it's important to push for it. It's important to be fast, but I don't think there's a fast track. I think you're right to say Ukraine should push with the countries of the Western Balkans for membership. And I think if there's one lesson from previous enlargements, is you have to push, and push. EU is always reluctant to accept new members. There are always member states which are going to be against it, but you have to push and you have to ask for it, and you have to not demand it, but you have to say, let's move to the next step. A lot of the countries which applied for membership were were not recommended to apply for membership by the European Commission, and they did so anyhow. So in a certain way, you have to, really make sure that you keep yourself on the agenda. And for that, you have to keep the European integration consensus within your society and sustain that beyond the war and the extraordinary circumstances in which the country finds itself now. And also find allies in the EU beyond the war. I mean, it's understandable that there's a lot of solidarity, and it should be, with Ukraine, but don't expect that to continue indefinitely. After the end of the war, which we all hope will be soon, there will be not the same level of solidarity. And so you have to have strategic allies in the European Union, both who support you and also, and this is a big problem we're discovering, there are lots, each country can block the accession process. Malta can block the accession of Ukraine to the European Union. So can Cyprus, so can any country. And I'm just giving the small countries as examples that it's not about size. So you want to be in a position where you can actually avoid these vetoes and work on a way. I think this is the biggest challenge in the enlargement process now, is try to reduce the vetoes, because it could be that Hungary might block Ukrainian accession in the future over Hungarian minority issues. And we've seen this with Bulgaria against North Macedonia. These are often issues which are completely frivolous, but they can block the whole process. So these are real challenges which I think Ukraine will be confronted with, not now, but down the road. And it's good to anticipate it, to push in the EU to change those rules, reduce the bilateral blockages, and create allies to keep the momentum going. And then I think, accession could be possible in a decade or something like that. But that is probably the most, let's say, optimistic scenario, because between the Europe agreements and membership of the Central and East European countries, it took basically 13 years. And that kind of was the fastest accession we've seen. Of course, there is already an association agreement with Ukraine, but I think less than 10 years is unrealistic, considering past experience. But pushing for that timeline and having not getting a fixed date, but getting a goal date would be certainly something worth striving for.
Florian, thank you for your fast speech, and I think that in a researcher's area, it is wonderful that we have a possibility to express different ideas, and I think that it is normal that one group of people push one idea, and but simultaneously there can be some another ideas, and I think that we at the end should just help each other, since our main goal is to find the best solution for Ukraine to become a real member of EU. So thank you for your feedback. And now I see that there is the last question to our speakers. Dima just wrote to me that he does not have electricity now, so maybe I will ask Borja and Florian to answer. How do you estimate the role of educational institutions in the implementation process? Do you think this should be more intensive cooperation between state bodies of Ukraine and Ukrainian university? So what do you think? Will it be helpful for Ukraine to develop negotiations with universities, or it will not be helpful? I just do not know this aspect of experience in Western Balkans. I just know that they involve lots of think tanks and NGOs in this process, but I do not know about universities. Maybe you can react.
I mean, I can briefly say, I think there are two different elements. One is show the benefits of EU integration to as many citizens as possible. And one of them is, of course, showing it to students. I mean, full integration into Erasmus, into all of these mechanisms, the Horizon projects, has been very important for student mobility in the Western Balkans. So that's one element. It's less about the technicalities of integration, but more showing the benefits. Then there is showing otherwise, I don't think universities, researchers are important actors, and they're often, scholars of EU integration are often the people who are involved in the negotiations and providing advice. So certainly expertise is very important. You need But it's less academics, but more, let's say, civil servants and maybe some think tanks, as you said. These are the key people who both are on the negotiation side, but also need to monitor the governments, because again, you want to make sure that you have a strong civil society based on expertise who can monitor the government's efforts to make sure they're doing a good job in negotiating and in being as fast as possible. You want to have a large group of citizens pushing for enlargement and finding ways to really monitor the process so that it's leading to results, and to also criticize the government when it's not doing its job as good as it could when it comes to the enlargement process. So of course, higher education is part of that larger equation.
From my side, I just think that potentially it can be helpful to our government to look at least for the people, because resources are very important to our countries. So I think that we run of time and we lost some of the speakers, some of our Ukrainian speakers, because of the blackouts in Kiev. So now they do not have electricity. I am grateful. I want to say that I'm very grateful to Ukrainian army that they provided us an opportunity to speak today. And also I am grateful to our electricity guys who provide us a possibility to speak, because now it's real a big challenge. I am grateful to all the people who find time to join us, and I am grateful to Maria for your comments and questions. So I wish you to have a good day, and I wish you to not forget about Ukraine, and to do everything that is possible to make our European future real, but not in dreams. So have a good day. Thank you to all of you. Bye bye.